Hello and welcome back to the Inhabit Health podcast. I'm Caroline.
And I'm Caitlin. And today we're tackling something that touches every single one of us deeply on a personal level. And this is our relationship with food, not just what we eat. We're going to go deeper into how modern food systems have pulled us away from our bodies and our health and the natural world around us. So if you're exhausted by the noise of contradictory nutrition advice and ready to reconnect with your own instincts, this episode is exactly what you need.
Food is so much more than what's on your plate. It's also tied to culture, emotions, biology, even the systems that shape our world, which we're very well aware of. Too often we're handed narratives about food that disconnect us from our intuition, our bodies, nature, which is where food originally comes from and is sourced from.
We want to empower you to think critically about what you eat and reconnect with your intuition. I think that's been huge for both of us. And feel free to challenge the narratives that profit off of our confusion. So that being said, I would like to share a little bit about my own personal journey with food, my relationship with food and eating, because there's definitely been an evolution to get to where I am now. I was a ballet dancer for a long time. I got really serious when I was 12, 13 years old. And it just consumed my life. And up until that point, I think I had a really healthy relationship with food. I loved to eat. I loved food, but I was eating what we had in the house. And a lot of times it was kind of that standard American diet. Looking back, there's definitely way more processed foods in my diet as a child than I would have liked or that I would ever recommend. Entering into the ballet world, I think really started to skew my perception. First, my body image, because you're suddenly I was going to dance 5-6 days a week and spending 4 to 6 hours staring at myself in a mirror. So even though I was young and I was long and lean, I still was having these dysmorphic thoughts about my body. And then you're also absorbing in everything around you, other people, even hearing my ballet teacher talk about during her professional career, how some of the women would get through production season and they were literally starving themselves and then binging after the show. So that's the information that I was taking in. And to an extent, recognizing that it was wrong, but also thinking, well, is that what it takes? Because this was something I was so passionate about. So,
and at this point, you're 12, 13 years old.
Yeah, this was throughout high school.
So to some extent, I think it's fair to say that it's normal to begin to look at your body differently and question what you're eating. I think developmentally, when we go through puberty and we're in those growing ages, we become so confused by our bodies and what it's doing that I think it's somewhat normal. But then throw yourself into an environment like ballet, where it's very body focused and image focused, I think that's even harder.
Yes. Yeah. It became a big struggle. And I think, for me, and I'll get there, the most freeing thing was learning about my hormones, which is what was happening during puberty. But learning that really helped me to heal my relationship with food. But before then, my late teens and early 20s, I pursued a professional ballet career and I was on my own. At 17, I was living by myself. So it was up to me to feed myself. And I think around that time is when I read the book Skinny Bitch. I don't know if you're familiar with that one, but it's basically vegan propaganda. And I read that and I had already been having some digestive issues. And I was well, that really turned me off to the dairy industry. I'm going to cut out dairy and see what that does for me. And I did start to eat a more plant-based diet. So I know I wasn't getting enough protein. And then at the same time, I was really struggling to build muscle mass because by this point I was in a professional training program. And what I was doing every day was going to dance Monday through Saturday and there for, 5 to 7 hours a day. But I was really struggling to build muscle mass and I just didn't really understand, how could I be working out so much and still not seeing definition. So I was well, protein, I should eat more almonds. So That's where my mind was at. And at the same time, then I was really in an environment where there were people that had full on eating disorders. So you can see like how much they're struggling and how unhealthy they look. But then at the same time, you're in this place where you're being compared partially about your size. So it's just like this mental game that you're constantly playing with yourself. So I found myself in a pattern of really restricting my diet during the week. And then I would get to the end of the week and like just be so exhausted and end up binging on whether it was ice cream or something sweet or something really carby at the end of the week. And then feeling bad about myself. And then, I should probably go to like hot yoga and sweat it out. And it was just like this cycle of not really feeling super confident about my body. And I continued, throughout my early to mid 20s, feeling pretty much the same way. And it was really just, it was a lot of mind games because your boss could pull you aside and be like, hey, you need to lose some weight before
Right.
the next show or you're not going to get cast.
Which,
in the next.
again, just to bring it back to the nature of the work you're doing, obviously, if you're in a corporate setting or in a job where you're not doing ballet, your boss is not going to pull you aside and talk to you about your weight. So
Yeah.
your profession was feeding into this narrative in your mind that already existed.
Yes. And it just, for me, I was just really not confident in
Right.
myself because of how this relationship that I had with food. And then at the same time, I just had this fixation on food because I was really like hungry all of the time. All I wanted to do was eat. So I would just constantly be thinking about like, what is the next thing that I'm going to eat? And I didn't even realize how much mental space that was taking up for me until I got past it. So I stopped dancing when I was 25, 26. I had like a year of being like, I'm not really sure what I'm doing. And then I started to direct myself into my Pilates career and getting my hormone health education. And so from that point on, I realized that I was really unhealthy in a lot of ways. But then learning about the intricacies of the female menstrual cycle and how much my hormones fluctuate throughout the month and what kind of macronutrients they need in order to be optimally produced and working in my body, it was like, oh, like I should be eating to fuel my hormones so that I feel the best. And that really, for me, was like just this unlock. And then the idea of intuitive eating was really big in the last like couple years. And that's something that I also resonated with, but I feel like that one is just so it's overused and thrown around because for me, like I could not intuitively eat until I had healed my gut and learned about my hormones. And then it's like, okay, now I intuitively understand what to eat. And, that doesn't mean you're not going to crave something really sweet or something like really decadent every once in a while, but you have like this track that you're able to kind of stay on. And then if you know what the consequences are if you're going to take a step off to the side and indulge in something. So for me, it took really just learning more about myself, finding that body autonomy and getting that education to really help me.
Do you think that education about your hormones and about your body was what gave you the confidence? And what changed for you when you left ballet?
When I left ballet, I was still really self-conscious and it was a big drastic shift in like how much activity I was doing throughout the day. So to like the average person, I probably didn't look that much different, but I felt like I did. So any comment, like even if my boyfriend made like a joke or something about some part of my body or the way I looked, like it would just set me off and I would just be so distraught. And like, I thought he was, telling the truth. And he'd be like, no, I'm joking because it's not true. And I'd be like, no, that's exactly what I see, and I look in the mirror or whatever. And he just like, he couldn't understand that. Um, because he'd never been in that ballet environment. So he just finally was like, all right, I'm not going to make any jokes like that anymore. Um, but now it's like, it's totally different because I see my body in a completely different way. Like I didn't have the respect for what my body could do until I learned what the menstrual cycle was and like what female hormones were. Because up until then, like it was just constantly feeling bad about myself because I felt like I couldn't do enough, like I couldn't be consistent enough in my physical activity or what I was doing. And then learning that, oh, my hormones actually fluctuate every day. I'm not going to feel the exact same way. And I should probably try to adjust in order to accommodate that was just like such a revolutionary idea to me at the time. And it just felt so free. At one point, I had a colleague she was a dancer from Russia. So she was from there. She grew up there. She came up training there. And once a month, when she got her cycle, she wouldn't show up to work. And the rest of us were like, where is she? Like, nobody gets a day off. And she was just like, no, in Russia, like when you get your cycle, you take a day or two to rest. And like, that's what's expected of you. And to us, it just was like, well, that's lazy, you know?
When you learn about your hormones and you learn that you're not supposed to operate the same way every single day or even all day long, oh, it's like coming up for air for the first time.
Quick interruption here. We are so excited to share something new with you.
We at Inhabit Health have created a 10-week transformational coaching program called The Reset.
Through weekly coaching, yoga, Pilates, and other practical tools, along with a supportive community, we are going to help you build habits that stick. Whether it's improving your sleep, managing stress, or finding a way of eating that truly works for you, whether you want to achieve your ideal weight, manage PCOS, or take control of fertility, this program is for you.
We're keeping it a small group so we can focus on each person's journey and really meet with each and every one of you, learn about your health and dig in 2-on-1 with Caitlin and I. We're going to be covering every crevice of your life, including your relationships, your energy, and your physical health. So check out the link in the show notes to sign up, and we can't wait to experience this with you. It's like seeing with new eyes. You are like, oh my gosh, I make sense.
Yeah. It's like the pieces like click into place and you're like, oh, I'm not broken. Like there's nothing wrong with me. Like this is how it's supposed to be. And to answer your question about education, I do think that education could fill the gap for the, because I know that there's a lot of women, there's a lot of young girls that struggle with things like this. And I've often actually asked myself that question, like if I had gotten this information sooner, would it have changed things? Because, I went to various different ballet programs with different companies. And more often than not, there was usually like at some point, some kind of nutritional seminar, some of them better than others. Nothing ever really soaked in for me in terms of nutrition there. But I feel like, going all the way back to like fifth grade when you get your period talk and like your like makeshift health class or whatever, I feel like that information was delivered really poorly and without a lot of context. And I think that that is where the seed should start to be planted about how to fuel our bodies, because you're kind of coming to this age where you're getting more autonomy over your body, you're getting more independence, and you're making more choices for yourself. So I think it really started then. And I never used to really even like eating protein that much, I loved like the carbs. And that's an issue. Like you need protein, especially if you're somebody that's really active. So I think starting to educate kids younger on how to properly fuel their bodies would make a huge difference, because then, once you're a teenager, you kind of think you know everything and you don't want to be told what to do. So I think it could help a little bit at least.
Totally agree. But also at the same time, when we were in middle school, carb forward was the way that we were taught. We were taught to eat a plate full of carbs, and that was the healthiest thing for us.
The options in the school lunch line, looking back, middle school is like crostini, so like pizza crust, like dip things, and like fries and fried chicken nuggets and things like that. It's just like those are the options that you have. So I think systemically things need to really change if we're going to make like actually an impact, unless you're getting everybody to pack their lunch.
But then that also requires parents to buy food
Mhm.
that is healthy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just a domino effect here. We have to go all the way back. And I mean, that's kind of what inspired me to strike out on this path with the Spring to Life method in the first place is like, maybe I can change the lives of somebody else that's like my contemporary, my peer, and maybe that's going to influence their children. So it's just something that has to like change generationally over time. I think to expect it to happen instantaneously as much as we would like that to happen, I think there's just too much pushback.
What is super interesting about our stories when we look back is how much we didn't realize we were contributing to a lot of the issues that we were having.
Mm-hmm.
I was in the best shape of my life when I first got, quote, sick, because that's when my chronic illness symptoms started. But I was in great shape. I was 19 years old. If you looked at me, I would have been a very in shape individual. But I woke up every single day, had coffee on an empty stomach, and then would go do HIIT workouts. Sometimes I would do 2 a days, lift in the morning, cardio at night, or vice versa. I was working out so hard, and I didn't necessarily feel my body horribly, but I didn't understand what fueling my body even meant. It was just like a whole different perspective on food than I have now about actually like fueling my workouts or fueling my cells. And what it sticks out to me the most that I didn't realize was happening, and I hope someone listening hears this and is like, oh my gosh, that's me. Like, that's my goal. I really hope that happens. My extreme anger was so problematic. And it was problematic to the point that it actually was like ruining relationships for me. But I just thought it was my personality. I didn't know anything different than being on a blood sugar roller coaster every single day. So I didn't know I had low blood sugar and that was making me like lash out or be super moody. And I didn't know when my blood sugar was super high. I just knew that like when I was hungry, I lashed out at the people around me and I felt like I was going to die if I didn't get something. Like, I just felt so dire. And like my roommates would kind of like make fun of me for it or like throw food at me if I was like angry, which I love. But like, I think I had no idea that I was going through that. And I wonder how many women are still going through that and just think that that's just like their personality and don't actually know what it's like to come off that roller coaster and be steady. And I mean, I went through that really for the longest time. I don't think I ever truly, I think I came off of it to an extent when I started eating more protein forward and things like that and eating breakfast in general.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think I truly fully came off of that until recently when I did go carnivore keto. And, you know, I ate like clean, but I was still struggling with my PCOS symptoms. I was eating all whole foods or organic for the most part, but I was still having irregular cycles and inflammation and all of these symptoms. I couldn't really figure out why. And then one day recently, I like said out loud and I almost didn't want to say it. I was resistant to it that I know in my like intuition, if I change my diet, then something will improve. It's the last thing I didn't do. Like I've done
Mm-hmm.
everything, but the only thing I haven't done is be super dramatic about my diet because I was still eating everything. And I was under the impression that a healthy body should be able to eat everything. Like we should be able to have it all and be completely fine. That's healthy for our microbiome. It's healthy for, you know, our mental health so that we don't get disordered eating, all of those things. Like, you know, we go on Instagram and we see accounts that are dedicated to intuitive eating and everything in moderation. And you need to be eating everything because it's not good for your mental health if you don't. So I was just like, okay, well, I don't ever want to have disordered eating, so I don't want to go down that rabbit hole of restricting my food. So I resisted it very hard. Once I admitted it to myself with so much resistance, it almost like got the fear out of my head and into the world. And then a couple weeks later, I was like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to try it because I need to do something. So that week, I cut out big triggers, like big obvious triggers, dairy, sugar, gluten, anything processed oils. And the reaction was so surprising. My first day, I just felt like, okay, a little tired. My second day, I felt terrible. By my third day, I had fevers, chills. I felt like I was dying. And looking back, my body had never been without probably sugar a day in my life up to this point. It had never been without all of those triggers before. And if I do have, you know, overgrowth candida or Lyme in my body, then those bacteria were feeding off of that stuff. So when I did that, I started to simultaneously look into the research on keto, and it was blowing my mind the way that there was research showing that women with PCOS were reversing their symptoms in as little as 12 weeks with a keto diet. There was research on how people were improving epileptic seizures with keto, and all of this research on so many chronic conditions that we don't fully understand were being healed with keto. So I ended up slowly over time going carnivore keto, and I lost all my inflammation has gone down. My moods have gotten so smooth. Like I don't really even have anxiety and depression swings at all anymore. I don't have blood sugar roller coasters. I'm never hangry. I had my first 28-day cycle 3 months in, and I've lost almost 20 pounds of fat that was just hanging out on my body, probably holding on to toxins as well. And yeah, all of that after I was so skeptical of restrictive diets was so eye-opening to me because I thought they caused disordered eating and would be so unhealthy for me, but I never felt better, and I would do it 1,000 times over to get the results that I got. And I wonder how many people are telling themselves that they don't want to do it because it's too hard. It's going to be too hard, or it's going to be too much of a struggle for me mentally, or whatever it is. And they're holding on to so many symptoms that actually exacerbate their mental health way more. And it's so interesting listening to your story and my story because we almost have the opposite problems in our stories with food. Like you were clearly restrictive with food, and I was like resisting restricting when it was what I needed to do. And I think that is kind of the point of intuitive eating, is like sometimes doing the thing that we know is hard that we have to do to get ourselves to a place of health.
Yeah. I think there's just so much rhetoric out there that confuses this conversation. And I mean, seeing you succeed like on this carnivore diet has been such a cool thing for me to observe. And it's been inspiring for me to maybe not go full carnivore, but make like adjustments in my diet to further eliminate those processed foods. You know, to me, like I've been thinking a lot about how much sugar is in our diet. And I know like our sugar consumption, I've heard technically has not increased very much over the past couple decades, but compared to our ancestors 150 years ago, like we eat so much more sugar. Like even having fruit to some people, like depending on the season and their location, was such a luxury not that long ago. And it's something that we have at our fingertips all of the time, and we're able to indulge in sugar all of the time, and carbohydrates all of the time. So for me, like, yes, I had this kind of restrictive past, and then I have really messed up my digestion, and then had all these food sensitivities. So I had to do an elimination diet. And then after I felt stable, I really did kind of let myself go and just think everything in moderation. Like I'm just going to have a little bit. But in the past like year, I would say you just start to realize the things that make you feel good and the things that don't. So for me, eating healthy, whole foods and being a little bit particular of like, no, I don't actually want the Little Caesars pizza at the party. I'm going to wait and go home and cook myself food. Like that's not disorder. That's me honoring my body. And it's not to say I make that decision every single time, but it's just a personal choice of honoring your body. And I think there's also a difference between an eating disorder and choosing to eat really clean and healthy. Um, there's a lot of like the mentality is different. Like it's not the same thing, in my opinion.
And I think the reason we're bringing this up is because there's been a trending word going around of orthorexia, and lots of accounts are talking about people with orthorexia, which is basically an obsession with eating clean, and it's labeled as like a disorder, but we have to look at the context in which we're living, where 60% of the American diet is ultra processed foods. So yes, avoiding ultra processed foods is difficult when you're constantly going to parties or family events or whatever, with when you're surrounded by ultra processed foods, when every store you go in is full of ultra processed foods. It is a challenge and a conscious effort to avoid those foods, but eating whole foods is seen as extreme, and it's really just our natural way of being.
Yeah, you can't say it any differently. It's just natural to eat the whole food. Like it's funny that there's so many things on the market that we think we need to have in our diet. A lot of times I go to the grocery store and I always start in the produce section and make my way around, and every once in a while I need something from the center aisles, but the more I walk up and down them, the more I'm like, I don't want to bring this into my house. There's no reason for me to have this. And especially if you're eating like a really protein forward diet, you're not necessarily hungry for all those like really snacky processed foods or anything. Like when you come back to this more like ancestral way of eating, those other things don't fit into the equation.
We also have to think about who is benefiting from these kind of narratives, what systems and what corporations are benefiting from people treating those things as disordered.
Yeah, I mean, even if you just look at like profit centers, like who's profiting, when you start to eat more clean and healthy, it's much, much easier to eat local and to just support your local economy, small businesses, the butcher, the rancher, the dairy farm, the person down the street that has chickens for eggs, the local cheesemaker, versus these multinational corporations that are making Fruit Loops and Gushers and potato chips. And, you posted some like a Skittles drink on your stories last week.
Oh my gosh, we have to talk about that. What was it called? I have to look it up or something really quick. It was like a Skittles, I'm gonna Google it, drink. And it's called Skittles drink. That's what it's called. It's literally Skittles in a bottle. But the way this interacts with your body, it had 32 grams of sugar. It was filled with artificial dyes, chemicals. It like, to put this in a child's body is just asking for it to wreak havoc on their system.
It's wild to me. And then, you kind of have that, like, is it okay for things like that to exist as long as people know what the consequences are? I guess so. But like, who is the sick person that thinks that that's a good idea?
You're marketing to children mostly. I mean, maybe I'm sure there are adults who want to drink that.
Oh,
it's
sure.
Liquid sugar.
Yeah, if you want that quick sugar high energy boost.
Sure. I also want to talk about food scientists. A lot of them have been coming out and kind of debunking quote myths about like GMOs and MSGs and common chemicals that people in the holistic world talk about. Now, I first heard the word food scientist and I was like, is that really a thing that we have? Because my relationship with food is such that food comes from nature because I eat whole foods that come from nature. So to think of the concept of a food scientist felt so foreign to me almost because it implied that these are people who are studying like chemistry to chemically engineer processed foods that we put in our body.
Well, I mean, how do you think we get Skittles drink and Beyond Meat?
Idea of having shelf stable food that is globally accessible, that is affordable, is a really good idea. Like the intention, I'm sure, with our society moving towards processed food to be able to feed more people, to be able to provide access, to be able to improve shelf life so that we have more accessibility and longer stored food is a really good idea. So like, of course, that's good arguments toward food scientists and chemically engineered food. That's always going to be a good argument toward it.
Fair.
Right.
Yes. But
yeah.
I mean, I think there's a difference between having like canned chicken noodle soup and maybe even like Spam versus some of just like the heinous like snacks that they make for children and think that parents should feed it to them.
Right. So like, let's talk about food scientists. Like, what are some things you've seen from food scientists? What's happening in that space?
So it's so interesting to me because I can see like these are people that like really relate with like data and they like the science of things. Like they want to break things down and look at it that way. So I understand that. And I understand like they have a very, I would say like it's like a clinical view of like these ingredients in food, like say MSG, for example. I saw a video of a food scientist totally defending MSG as something that's suitable to eat. Like, what's the difference between that and salt? Basically, like they're both adding sodium content. But just because, like, I think you have to take some like observational data and like look at how it's actually affecting people and take their personal stories into account, their personal experiences into account. I think the most perfect like comparison I can make, I was listening to an episode of a different podcast where they were interviewing a doctor who used to be mainstream and now he's very skeptical of seed oils and he's kind of like a whistleblower on seed oils and how detrimental they've been to our health. And they were having the cholesterol conversation. Well, isn't lower cholesterol better? Seed oils lower cholesterol. And he said, okay, seed oils lower cholesterol, but so does arsenic. Does that mean that we should have arsenic in our diets? No, just because something maybe like looks good in one light does not mean across the board it's the same and can be an appropriate substitute for something that naturally occurs in our world. So I think that for me, when I see videos from food scientists, that's kind of, I'm like, you're just lacking like a little bit of context for this
Nuance.
conversation. Like you're not necessarily wrong in what you're saying, but it doesn't necessarily apply to real life that way.
And we also have to remember food scientists' research is funded by the big food corporations. Same with nutrition research. We see a lot of nutritionists defending seed oils. And this is problematic because we know that the research done on a lot of these chemicals and preservatives that are in the food is done by the food corporations themselves. So there's a lot of financial conflict of interest. They often downplay the negative consequences. Whole foods, plants and animals, things that come from nature, plug into our biology, and our biology knows exactly what to do with it, how to use it for fuel, exactly where to send it within the body to use it optimally, to create balance within our bodies, to bring us back to homeostasis, to fuel our brain, to activate our cells, then we don't really need to know what the double-blind placebo study says about that chemical that's in rocket fuel. I was going through common preservatives and I was so surprised to see, when it says commonly found in cereal, it's also like commonly found in automotive fuel, commonly found in glue, commonly found in petroleum products like plastic. And it's like, whoa, this is crazier than I even thought.
The pervasiveness of plastic in our lives is just, it's difficult to totally absorb and like take in. I think like if you last week's episode with Sophia, we talked a lot about environmental toxins, and she said the first thing that you should do is get rid of as much plastic in your house as you possibly can, because you are just, whether it's holding your food or it's breaking down, you're absorbing or breathing in these plastic particles. They're becoming part of you, and plastic is not natural. It's a petroleum based product. I actually want to ask you if you feel like you are going to deviate from this carnivore diet eventually, like when you feel like you kind of hit some health markers that you're looking to hit, do you feel like you're going to deviate and start to find more of a quote unquote balanced diet?
I want to say yes, because that was always my intention with starting.
Mhm.
I am taking it one day at a time and using my body to guide me. So I've tried to eat some sugars and vegetables and figured out what vegetables I don't respond well to. I haven't really responded well to fruit. It has caused inflammation or like mood flare ups in me. And I'm working closely with my functional doctor to figure out why I am having such strong responses to sugar and what the future will look like. I did go to my doctor and I was like, this is great, because he prescribed me the carnivore diet. And I was like, this is great that I'm feeling better. However, what's the plan here? Am I stuck on this forever? Because if I am, just tell me. Just tell me the truth. Just break it to
Mhm.
me gently. And, he basically told me that he thinks that my problems are twofold, PCOS and Lyme, and that both were running the show. And so we've sort of addressed one, but we have to address the other. And once we can address the other one, hopefully you'll have a little bit more metabolic flexibility, or just
Mhm.
flexibility in your body in general and in your microbiome to be able to have sugar every once in a while or have carbs every once in a while and not have extreme flare ups. So I'm very hopeful. That's why I'm going through this Lyme protocol now, to push, that bacteria out as much as possible and see if that changes things for me in the future. So that's my response to if I'll ever come off of this diet. I want to and I hope to, but I do think that, just to wrap this up, I will say that I don't think I am someone that's ever going to respond very well to sugar.
Mhm.
I think that I just was in a diabetic state, and I don't think that my body is ever going to be able to fully process sugar like maybe other people can. And that's just okay with me at this point.
Yeah, well, I mean, you seem very happy and healthy on your meat diet. So I know it's restrictive in the way that you're like, oh, there's all these other options out here of things that I used to eat, and right now they're just not, they're off the table or unavailable to me. But I just wanted to ask that because I think for anybody listening, it's like if if you take a step and you do an elimination diet or you commit to the carnivore diet, it's not like you're set in stone for the rest of your life. Like everybody's going to respond differently to these things. And it's okay to try something
and not have it work, and then, maybe go down a different path.
Sure. And you might just not want to come off either. That's kind of what happened with me. Was I set like a benchmark for myself. I'm not doing this longer than 12 weeks. Like, it's supposed to be very therapeutic, and then I'm coming off and I'm eating normal again. And that was always the plan. But I really like how I feel. I feel really good. So for me to go back, like I said, I've dabbled a little bit, but it just doesn't make sense for me. So I think it just depends on how you feel and what you can tolerate personally. I think everything is personal when it comes to diet. I don't think that there is like a one size fits all. I think everyone kind of needs a different macro formula.
Mm-hmm. Yes, everybody's so bio individual. So what works for one person doesn't always work for the other. And this is probably like a whole other topic, but I'm really curious as to how blood types factor into this, because I think there is a lot of evidence to back up those like blood type diets, and like who can process meat a lot better than other people. I know you're Italian. I say that because my boyfriend's Italian, and that's like all he wants to eat too is just protein.
Which is ironic because I was raised Italian, but that meant carbs mostly.
Well, it's like a pasta culture.
Yes. Yeah.
There's something in your constitution though.
Right.
That red meat.
Oh, for sure. Okay, all that to say, I think that like we've made the point that eating whole foods isn't a disorder, that concept really benefits big food corporations, and that food scientists and people who play into that are going to push that narrative because marketing makes eating healthy seem extreme, but it doesn't have to be. I also want to make the point and reiterate that diet culture has been pushed as something that's very negative. And for me, I found a lot of freedom and joy and improvement in doing a restrictive diet. So for everyone, no, but maybe try it if you're like me 8 years in and still struggling with your PCOS diagnosis. Maybe try it.
Yeah, well, and it comes down, we were talking about intuition earlier, like it's just really building a relationship with your body and asking yourself, do I feel good when I'm eating this way? Or do I feel better when I am maybe a little bit more picky or restrictive about the things that I'm putting into my body? And you just have to have that confidence in yourself to know that you're making the best decision for your body.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for listening. Or challenge, if you haven't already, subscribe to our podcast. Please DM us on Instagram at Inhabit Health, and we can't wait to hear from you.